Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, it's Science Fiction Saturday again, and I've got some really up-to-date and topical stuff. I've got a movie from 1932, and I've got a TV pilot from 1994, so I'm right on the cutting edge here. The 1932 movie is called FP1 Doesn't Answer, and it's a German science fiction movie, which has some really interesting aspects to it. And the 1994 television pilot is Doorways, which was written by George R.R. Martin, and had such potential, which the studio ABC in America didn't deliver on. So let's get started with FP1 Doesn't Answer. It was based on a novel by Kurt Siodmak, and the premise is pretty simple. I'll give you the science fiction part of the premise first. A German engineering company and shipping company decides it's going to make an enormous platform in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean called FP1, which stands for Floating Platform 1. And this platform is going to be half a kilometre long, 150 metres wide. And it's there to be an airport because at the time, aeroplanes didn't have the donk to travel all the way across the Atlantic in one go. So the idea was there would be a midpoint at which the planes could land, refuel, everybody could go and have a bicky in the canteen, get back in the plane and fly all of the way across to America. The other option they had is that you can fly from Northern Europe to South America, you can fly from the United States to Africa. It opened up a whole bunch of technological and aviation possibilities. Not a bad idea until people started using jets and it all became unnecessary. But I like the idea of this enormous, basically a truck stop in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And this movie was made before the Nazis got in, so it's on the clean side of the slate. And it was made by UFA, the big German film company at the time. And it was made in three versions. The first version was the German version. Then in 1933, there was a French and an English version of it, which were made with different actors. Just to give you a bit of an example, in the German version, the main pilot and one of the protagonists, Ellison, is played by a guy called Hans Albers. In the French version, it was played by Charles Boyer, and in the English version, it was played by Conrad Veidt. So you've got three different actors playing the same roles, and that happened with all of the roles in the movie. It's kind of like that 1931 Dracula, where Bela Lugosi was Dracula when they were filming during the daytime, and then at night they'd film the Spanish version with a different guy in it, and everybody said, who watched both of them, that the Spanish version was better. Kind of like one of those gigs, but with an extra country added in. So the story is that a pilot called Ellison, who's a very famous pilot, because long-distance pilots were celebrities in those days, think Lindbergh and Charles Kingsford Smith and a whole bunch of other people. And so Ellison is a very famous pilot, and he finds out that there's a plan to build FP1, but the shipping company, the Lennart Shipping Company, is sitting on the plans and not doing anything with them. The company is run by two brothers and their sister Claire, played by Sibylle Schmitz, who was an interesting actress. Look up Sibylle Schmitz on Wikipedia after you watch this video. She had a really gothic later life. Lennart steals the plans and the cops come around and get the plans, but he hasn't got the plans. He's put them on the desk upstairs so that it's brought to the attention of the owners of the company, who look at the plans again and decide it's a good idea, and they decide to build the platform. And the guy who's in charge of the platform is a guy called Droste, played by Paul Hartman. And there ends up being a love triangle between Ellison, the pilot, Claire, the magnate, and Droste, who is running the project for FP1. And the movie spends a little bit of time with that love triangle, and we get some good acting with it. It's kind of interesting because Hans Albers is really good as Ellison. So the platform gets built eventually. It's built on a whole bunch of steel cylinders, which can be filled with water to various levels with pumps, so that in rough weather it can hunker down or lift itself above the waves. So there's a lot of cool engineering in this. And there's enormous sets as well. What if it in making this is parts of the sets are built actually on the Baltic Sea. So all the bits you see that are underneath the platform are actually sets built into the ocean in a fairly calm place on the Baltic Sea. And there's also an enormous runway on the top, which is built as an enormous set. It's done in a slightly kind of Art Deco style, which makes it interesting. There's a lot of really good production design in this film. There are forces in the world that don't want FP1 to be successful. So when the Lennart shipyard builds it and drags it out into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and anchors it at the seabed, there are various bits of sabotage that go on during that whole process, and the company is keeping eyes on it. Meanwhile, Ellison has decided to test out a new plane for a different company and wanders off and crashes his plane in Australia and gets lost in the bush, and then eventually works his way back to Germany, by which time it's all finished. Because he had a bit of chemistry with Claire, he wants to renew their relationship, but Claire has moved on and is in love with Droster, who runs FP1. So you've got a stock standard love triangle there. Hans Olber's playing Ellison is totally over the top. He's a larger than life character and he plays it that way. He does a really nice job of it. I've only seen the German version, by the way. I haven't seen the English version or the French version. Getting any particular version of it's a little bit difficult, but if you look around the usual places, you can find it. Well, there's another character in this, which is kind of interesting. It's a press photographer who hangs around with Ellison when he's doing all of his stunts and his long plane trips. And he's called Pappy, and he is played by Laszlo Lowenstein, who you might know as Peter Lorre. And his character is really interesting. This is Peter Lorre in between M for Fritz Lang and when he went over to America and started doing things like the Maltese Falcon and all the other things we know him for. Very much a secondary character, but that's Peter Lorre, so he's always got a lot of charisma about it. And one of the things that Pappy does is he gets a job on FP1 as an engineer. He's not very good at it, and he takes photos because he wants to do a photo essay about this wonderful technological innovation that is floating Platform 1. He gets to show his chops as an actor, and having him in there gives me a kind of familiar anchoring point for the narrative. I go, okay, well, this is a movie that has Peter Lorre in it, and I can use that to watch the rest of the film and watch Peter Lorre and see how he was at a very early stage in his film career. I've seen M, of course, and I've seen The Man Who Knew Too Much, but this is in between those, and there's a kind of interesting point in his career. But the platform does get sabotaged. There is a saboteur on board, and the saboteur does a number of things. He smashes up the radio room on FP1 and shoots Droster and almost kills him, and he empties all of the oil tanks on the platform so they don't have any fuel, and he opens all the valves at the bottom of the platform so that it is slowly sinking into the Atlantic Ocean. And just to make things a little easier for himself, he opens a whole bunch of gas pipes on the platform so that all of the crew get gassed by natural gas leaking from these things in the ceiling. So headquarters loses contact with FP1, and the only person they can get to go and see what's going on the platform, because obviously radio communication's out, is Ellison, who has a new plane, and he takes Claire along with him because she owns the thing. And they fly to the platform and find the saboteur and find the sabotage, and they have to find a way to stop FP1 from sinking into the water. They rescue Droster, who's seriously injured. They rescue Pappy, the Peter Lorre character as well. And between them, Droster, Claire, and Ellison have to figure out a way to solve all of these problems. And one of the other problems they have is that Ellison's plane has lost a wheel in landing on the platform, and all of the other planes on the platform have been sabotaged, who is in the pay of big business, because as everyone knows, big business are the bad guys. Now, I like this movie. I think it's really great. I think the production design is good. The model work is pretty good for the time. The physical sets that they built on the shores of the Baltic Sea are really good. The acting is a little bit melodramatic, but on the other hand, this is 1932 Germany. It didn't have the grounded naturalistic acting that we got in later films. That's great. I love the technology they use. It's slightly futuristic, and it's an application of almost contemporary technology in an interesting way. The pumps that fill the cylinders underneath the platform with water, the engine room, the planes they have are really kind of groovy in a very, very retro way. Yeah, just looking at the furniture and looking at all the kind of infrastructure as it was 91 years ago in Germany is kind of cool. It's a window into the past, and UFA was the best of the best at making these kind of movies anywhere in the world. I think it's a bold piece of science fiction, and people may argue it's not science fiction, but it is. There's a technological problem in the world, and somebody creates something to solve it. That's bottom line science fiction in a very technical way, and FP1 does that. I like the three characters. I like the resolution of the love triangle plot as well, where Ellison does something heroic and then decides he's going to go off and do something else. It's just a lovely little grace note at the end of it. And it's probably the last hurrah of UFA, who did all sorts of things like Fritz Lang's Metropolis and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Frau im Mond and a whole bunch of forward-looking films like that. Then, of course, the Nazis came in and the game changed entirely. And even though there were good films made during that time, they're kind of tainted by the fact that they were made in that time. But this one predates that. And most of the main actors in this were not on board with Nazism at all. Hans Elbers worked in the film industry, but not with the stamp of approval from the Nazis, and his wife, who was Jewish, lived overseas during the war while Elbers worked, and they were reunited after the war. Sabira Schmitz had a tragic ending, unfortunately, and of course Peter Lorre jumped ship, went to England and then America, and never looked back. I think it's important to look at science fiction from this far back for a number of reasons. First off, you're seeing the path that the genre has walked in the last century, and for me that's always interesting. And you see some of the tropes of modern science fiction adventure being created in these early films, and you see the passion for technology and the passion for technological change and the passion for futurism a lot of good science fiction in the modern era has, though there is a lot of it which is science fiction in name only. I could go into that, but I won't. But FP1 Doesn't Answer is worthwhile. If you are interested in the history of science fiction, if you are interested particularly in the stuff that the German film companies did before, you know, what happened. So let's look at 1990s American mainstream television. George R.R. Martin had been kind of successful in a couple of TV ventures. He was successful as a science fiction writer, and in the 1980s he worked on the Twilight Zone TV series, and he was looking for another project in the early 90s. And about 91 or 92 he floated a couple of ideas to ABC Studios, and one of them they decided to make a pilot of, and it was called Doorways. Doorways is a broad concept. It's similar to a concept which was used a couple of years later for a TV series called Sliders, which, contrary to the name, is not about small hamburgers, but was about a bunch of people jumping through alternate universes. But for me, Doorways was a much grittier version of that, and it really had some potential. George R.R. Martin dedicated 3 years of his life to this project. He got to go ahead to make a pilot after a while, and the network also wanted 6 episodes written, and he wrote some of them he was showrunner on, but all up he spent about 3 years of his life on this project. And then ABC said, no, we're not going to move ahead with the series. Lois and Clark's going to be the one we're going to push because it has bigger name value, because people know who Lois and Clark are. So they chose to do that, and Doorways never got made into a series. But the pilot was released on VHS here in Australia, and there are a lot of VHS transfers out there. I think there's one on Tubi in some countries, and I'm sure there's at least one on YouTube. So I thought I'd watch it again and just see whether it still has a bit of grunt to it in 2023. I shouldn't mention which year it is now, because you might watch it in 2025 and think, oh, this is an old episode. It is, but bear with me. The story is pretty simple. A doctor called Thomas Mason, played by George Newbern, he is working in an ER in Los Angeles. When a woman gets brought in to the ER, she's been hit by a piece of wreckage. She was found in the middle of a freeway in Los Angeles. She was almost hit by a car. An enormous petrol tanker veered in front of her, and she blew it apart with a very small, very weird handgun she has, and she got hit in the head by a piece of shrapnel. Her name is Kat, and she's played by Anne de Gerlach. This is the kind of era when edgy French women were big in media. There was La Femme Nikita, for instance, and there was also An American Werewolf in Paris. Those kind of edgy, short-haired, punkish sort of French women were really big, and so Kat is played by a French woman, played by Anne de Gerlach. And Kat is unusual. She's got a bracelet on her forearm. That gets the interest of some intelligence people who find out that even though it's kind of organic, it's got circuitry in it, and they find out that the gun is actually a compressed air gun which shoots very tiny, very powerful explosives at things. And the gun is unusual in that it requires 2 human hands to use, because it's not designed for a human hand. Thomas tries to treat Kat, and the cops come in and try to muscle her. She bites the nose off one of the cops, and Thomas says, she's my patient, she's here, you can talk to her later, I'm going to take care of her now. And so he gains her trust, and starts getting the idea that she's not from around Los Angeles. She speaks about manhounds. She speaks about a dark lord. She's very scared and wants to get away because she knows something or someone is after her. Eventually, with Thomas's help, she escapes, and Thomas finds out that they're being hunted by a guy called Thane, played by Robert Nepper, a now discredited actor whose personal life veered to the brutal. I've got to be careful how I say things. And he is a manhound for the Dark Lord, a species so alien that all we see of it in the pilot is a cloud of gas surrounding it and a claw which is not shaped at all like a human hand. It's more like a reptilian claw covered in slime. So this is a very alien creature. And they're hunting Kat down because she betrayed them. She killed a Dark Lord. And so they're hunting her. And what Thomas doesn't realize at the start is that they're all from alternate universes. And that what Kat is trying to do is find a doorway, which is an ephemeral opening to another universe, as she flees the Dark Lord and the manhounds. Eventually, Thomas and Kat end up in a desert and fall through a doorway and find themselves in an alternate Earth where 15 years in the past, all of the petrochemicals in the Earth have been eaten by a particular microorganism which was designed to clean up an oil spill but spread. And so all plastics, all resins, all petrochemicals of all kinds have gone. And 15 years later, America is trying to rebuild its civilization without fossil fuels and without petrochemicals. All transport is horse-drawn or man-powered. A lot of the media is gone because a lot of it was on tape, and tapes were eaten by this bacterium. So you get this kind of post-apocalyptic future where the apocalypse is actually a microorganism which doesn't directly kill people but destroys the infrastructure of civilization. They meet a guy called Jake and his granddaughter who are transporting surreptitiously peanut oil, which is a really good natural lubricant, to Denver, Colorado in a horse-drawn Airstream trailer. They get attacked by a bunch of people, and there's some really good action scenes in this. The other thing I haven't mentioned is that one of the agents who is trying to investigate what Kat's about in the first universe is played by Kurtwood Smith, a guy called Traeger, who gets killed by the manhounds just before Kat and Thomas escape. And then they find Traeger in the second universe as an undercover police officer working at a bar. And I think if it had gone to series, it would have been an ongoing running gag of Traeger being killed in each universe these people jump into, because he gets killed in both universes ultimately. Bit of a spoiler there, but doesn't matter. So there are all sorts of interesting world-building bits in this first alternate universe. There are bikers, but they're actually on pedal bicycles. There's people just sitting around in bars being nostalgic about the time before all of the petrochemicals went away. They eventually get to Denver, Colorado, and they go past a theatre marquee where it says Bewitched live on stage, because they're making stage shows out of lost media that they can no longer access because all of the plastics have gone away. And rickshaws are the main means of transport in the cities, along with bicycles. Really interesting and detailed world building that really works. I think it's one of the best bits of 1990s world building you see in television in America. It really has a lot going for it. And they meet a guy called Jake, played by Howard Exton, who's transporting the peanut oil. He gets shot by some villains and they've got to transport him to Denver in a hurry, and they find an interesting way to do that. This pilot had such enormous potential for a series, particularly when helmed by somebody who knows science fiction as well as George R.R. Martin. In some other universe, of course, it did go to series and people love it, and there's probably conventions about it. But this one didn't fly, but it did get a release here on VHS, and it was popular. I remember talking with people when it came out on VHS about, hey, this is interesting, George R.R. Martin did this series pilot, and it never went anywhere, but geez, I wish it did. He later went on to do greater things, and all credit to him as well. George did the hard yards before he really hit it big with Game of Thrones. He worked in the vineyards of American television for a fair while and offered very fruitlessly, so all credit to him. But I liked Always. I think it had potential. That pilot really works. George Newbern is interesting as Thomas. By the way, his girlfriend back on his original Earth is played by none other than Carrie-Anne Moss in an early role. And there's a really kind of cute rapport between them as well. And of course, that then gives the character of Thomas an impetus to get back to his original Earth, because the doorways only move one way. You can only go from one world to another. You can't go back again. And that leads to the potential of a series that would have had episodes running a little bit along that wonderful, very open format that started with TV series like The Fugitive, where you can start again in another place and tell a story move on to the next place while still having a series arc as a part of it. A lot of people have said that Sliders copied this Doorways pilot and moved it around a bit and made it somewhat different. I don't think it did. I think it's a fairly common science fiction concept, alternate universes, and the television at some stage was going to do a series like this. I like Doorways more than I like Sliders. I think Sliders was a little bit dumbed down, and Luna is clawing my leg again. But I think it's good to mark these things and say, this existed, this was interesting, this had potential, and this never got the chance to realize its potential. There are so many series pilots that were done in the 20th century in America, and probably in the 21st century as well, that really didn't get the love and the encouragement they needed to flourish, and I think that popular culture is poorer for that. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Hit the notification bell. If you want to support the channel, you can become a channel member, and there's a link in the description on how to do that. You can also support the channel by donating at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, I've got Monday's video, the Sunday, Monday video, depending on where you live. I'm changing the format on that slightly, but it's still going to be fun. Then, of course, I've got Anything Can Happen Wednesday, and a whole bunch of stuff in the future. I've got the videos planned for the next 2 weeks, and I've got some fun stuff to talk about in them. So until I do, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some weird and wonderful outliers of science fiction, and I'll catch you next time.